Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is Cammy Bell. I am your host for your extra show for the week. As always, it is Old Firm weekend, and that can only mean one thing. I have to bring out the big guns, and they don't come much bigger than the boss. And that is our very good friend, David Edgar. David, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this weekend's game.
Yeah, no problem, Cammy. It's always nice to come on this show as well, although it may be a double dunt for listeners, so they might be a bit frustrated, but they'll just need to live with it.
Yeah, very true, very true. We've almost got over the disappointing result from last weekend, Davey. It's always difficult to be able to do these in the form that Rangers are in at the moment, but there's plenty will say there's not much value to this weekend's Old Firm game. It's Thursday at time of recording, and by the time you guys get a chance to listen to this, I'm sure that the Old Firm battle fever will start to kind of creep in a little bit, because as much as there isn't really anything to play for, David, I can't subscribe ever really to the idea of a meaningless Old Firm game.
No, once you get into it, both sides will want to win, and both sides will want to win for different reasons. Celtic, because although they've had a much more successful season than us, unfortunately, they have lost the last two matches to us, so they will not want to be going in the back of three Old Firm defeats. For us, it is really just about pride, temporary bragging rights. We're in this weird kind of hinterland, Cammy, stuck between the past and the future. And there isn't a sense of I'm sure we'll hear this from people connected with Rangers. Well, a victory, can help lay down a marker for next season, etc. But I think reality suggests that that's not true, because there's obviously going to be a new manager. There's going to be a new, hopefully, a lot of new players, but certainly an influx of new players and a lot of departures as well. So it really does kind of stand in isolation, this match. It's not going to have any bearing on the league table, because both sides are going to finish where they're going to finish. So, yeah, it's not going to be one I think people are going to be referring to in 5-10 years, put it that way. But in the here and now, of course, you always want to win it. You always want to beat them. But it's a kind of strange time, I think, for Rangers fans, because we all know that something is coming. We can see it. We're waiting on it. But at the moment, we're just having to kind of tread water till we get there.
I mean, I never find it acceptable to finish second, David, but the thing that's been interesting to me is that my hope would have been that we've known the league's been over for a while, right? We know the way how the season has ran, especially towards the latter half of the season and the kind of close. But what I've hoped we could have done is be able to try and reduce the points gap, just purely for pride, if nothing else. If we can do that, and we know obviously we've still got a few games to finish us up. I agree with you. I don't think it does anything much because of the necessary surgery that has to happen at the club from the number of levels that you've mentioned. But it would just be nice to be able to put something on them to say, yes, you've won the league. Yes, you've got a significant points difference. But even with a team that almost every Rangers fan I've spoken to wholeheartedly agrees has very much ran its course, you're not as far ahead as you might like to think.
It's difficult, because I think that this Rangers team has been a very strange one, that it's shown in bigger matches it can compete against teams really that are far better than the teams that Rangers have struggled against this season, that we've had real bother with. And that's why, in terms of things like, well, we want to close the points gap, you mentioned the word pride there. I don't think there's been enough of that in this Rangers squad this season. And I think it was highlighted last week by the manager sets them a challenge, right? There's 5 games to go, 15 points, here we go. And they fall at the first hurdle. And that has been the story of the season. It was another kind of disinterested performance, I felt, at Paisley. I didn't think it was a particularly edifying spectacle from a Rangers point of view, because I don't think that really looked to me like a team who were fully committed and playing for the future. As Barry Ferguson had spoken about that, and he said, well, this is up to them to prove that they deserve to be here next season. Well, the answer we got there then was a lot of them don't, which is not news, by the way, but it's just, to me, I think it kind of sums up where they have been this season. So I don't think that victory for either side will have much of a bearing on next season, to be honest, because there's so much change coming at Rangers. New owners, right? New board, new director of football, sporting director, whatever you want to title it, new management team, and then clearly there's going to be a lot of new players. You mentioned the word surgery there, and that is exactly what's going to take place. So it does, to me, this game sort of stands in isolation a little bit, but this is the type of game that Rangers have turned up for this season. There's no doubt about that. What we need to do is make sure that next season we've got a team that's capable of going into games where there isn't this focus, where there isn't a crowd that's completely buzzing for it, and delivers, because that has been, I was going to say it's Rangers' Achilles heel, it's Rangers' Achilles leg all the way up to the bum, unfortunately, because this season in so many games they've turned in these sort of turgid, not quite at it performances. And Barry Ferguson said it a few weeks ago, Cammy, he says it's easy to get up for Celtic and for Europe, right? Of course you're buzzing about those games, everybody's on about them, there's a palpable sense of excitement. That doesn't win you stuff. What wins you stuff is going and grinding out results when you're not at your best away from home against teams that are running and right in your face, and this Rangers team has proved time after time that it's incapable of doing that.
Yeah, that's true. And that's absolutely what's added, I think, to the frustration that we felt across the course of this season, because you will see some exceptional performances. The game at Parkhead obviously was excellent in terms of what we saw from a spirited performance and some good play. There was obviously some understandable tiredness and some lethargy in terms of the European campaign being mixed in with some of the expectations we had put in the players, but the motivation, I think, was there. Obviously, the win prior to that, you'd mentioned this could be the third defeat. I'm almost thinking it could be the fourth defeat for Celtic because we were cheated out of the League Cup final, but we can't do anything about that, sadly. The thing that's been interesting, you mentioned Barry Ferguson there, and I think what was interesting about the St Mirren fallout was I've never really hung too much on manager press conferences, pre-match pressers and immediately after the game. One of the things that you can never decry Barry Ferguson of is being able to show the passion and to be able to show the, in his pressers, the expectations. And he's been very, very honest, I feel, in terms of where he's been disappointed by the squad. But it was interesting to hear him talk about last weekend. He has seen players who he's giving instructions to, he's given them steer and direction, and they're not following it. And I thought that rang quite an interesting bell. Liam Kelly said something similar. And obviously, these guys are not going to go down the line of naming names. We would never expect them to do that, of course. But I think what would be interesting is whether or not we do see any kind of reaction to that, because you are right. There's going to be players playing on Sunday for Rangers who, by and large, will not be here next season. I understand that. But there'll also be players who, will look towards these games because they are hoping, expecting to be part of the setup for next season. And it will be interesting to see if we do get some reaction and who those players will be.
I think that there is definitely some truth in that. And there is a counterpoint to it as well, which is, well, Barry, you're continuing to pick these guys. He would argue then that, well, yeah, because I don't have many other options. So it's led to this situation where you've got guys that are too comfy in their position, despite the fact that they're not delivering to the levels that we need. I think it's very damning on any job, by the way, but particularly in any sport where a manager is saying, I am telling them what to do, I'm giving them instruction, and they are not carrying it out. Now, again, it's the manager's job to get them to carry it out. But I think in the case of a lot of these players, that they're either unwilling or incapable of it. And either way, they don't deserve to be here next season. And I think there is, when you watch a lot of the Rangers' performances domestically this season, there is this sense of guys who just don't get it, don't want to be here. And by don't get it, I mean the challenge of being a Rangers player, which is, teams are going to be bang up for it. They're going to be in your face. They're going to be running like their lives depend on it. And if you're not prepared to not only match, but beat that and overcome it, then you're going to struggle. And I think last week was such a... unfortunately, such a perfect example of what's gone wrong for us this season, which is some moments of quality that get us into leads, and then some really desperate moments at the back, leading to the concession of 2 goals, and just not getting to grips with the type of type of match that was there. So I feel sympathy for Ferguson as I did for Clement before, and there is. After that, that's not to excuse mistakes that they make, by the way. I'm not saying that they've been flawless and it's entirely down to the player. I think there is this, just on that, to go off on a tangent, I think sometimes there is this binary thing, and I've seen this online debate, that it's either the players or the manager. It can be both. Right? In the way that Rangers' current situation is down to the management of the first team squad, it's down to the medical malfunctions that we've had all season. It's down to the playing squad. It's down to the way the club has been run for the last few years. All of these things work in tandem, unfortunately. You don't have to pick one and say it's the players. It was nothing to do with the manager. No, it doesn't work like that. But I do feel a bit of sympathy. There's also the fact that when a manager is in the position that Barry Ferguson's in, which is a temporary role, then players do feel that they can switch off, whether consciously or subconsciously, because he's not going to be here next season, and they know that. And there comes a point where you know, I think you sensed his frustration last week that I'm repeating myself here, and they're still not delivering, they're still not doing the kind of things that they've been instructed to do. Personally, what I don't understand from a player point of view is what you're doing isn't working. So why wouldn't you listen to someone who says, do this differently and you might get a different result? Because surely, you know, that's when your professional pride kicks in and you think, I'm fed up not winning. I want to be winning football matches and getting praise. So I don't really understand why they do that. But the word that he used, and it's one we've used on Heart and Handle this year, is revert. They revert back to this slow, lethargic, timid way of playing, and that's their default setting. And for guys like that, there is no future at Rangers, let's be honest, because they're never going to be able to cope with the demands of being a Rangers player. So yeah, interestingly, I don't have any fears that they'll put a performance in on Sunday. I really do believe they'll go out there and they'll play well. The games after that, different story, and that says everything about the mentality of this Rangers squad.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, huge Barry Ferguson fan, and one of the things that he mentioned is, you know, you've kind of touched on there as well, in terms of, you know, he's telling the players and he's telling them. And one of the things that he brought, which I thought was quite interesting, was, you know, in any kind of workplace, which you and I have been involved in, right? So we've had more of these kind of conversations. You've had hot dinners. Is that if you've got someone that you're managing and you're giving them direction, you're giving them steer, you are trying to coach them, you are trying to improve their performance. One of the things that's interesting is, if they're not getting it, is it the way the manager is telling them? Is it the way that maybe you're having the conversation that's not resonating well enough with them? And I think that that's an interesting point, because maybe it speaks to where we knew, it's not a concern because I think we knew what was happening when Barry Ferguson was able to come in. But sometimes that's the experience that you need, and a little bit of that, I'll say self-reflection. I think people know what I mean when I say that, about how you're trying to come across to the players, and you're trying to make sure that these guys are not a lost cause. Because let's face it, although we know that there will be change, it can't be wholesale change. Not everybody's leaving. Everyone's, you know, going to have to make a decision. So there'll definitely be remnants of the squad here next season. They'll be aware that this change is happening anyway, in and around the club, the dugout, etc. Sometimes it can just be a case of, look, if you're not getting it, am I not explaining it in a way that you understand? And that I thought was quite an interesting point as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what management is about. It's about getting your ideas across, getting buy-in, and getting them then to go and execute what you want them to do. I do think that the deck is slightly stacked against any temporary manager in that sense, because players don't necessarily feel the need to challenge themselves to do things that you're asking them to do. And we are also at the tail end of a season. Teams slow down a bit. There's no getting away from it when there's very little to play for. We see it, although, you know, you see it in leagues apart from ours, and you see it in other teams in our league. This is what happens at this stage of the season. It's human nature. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it happens. But I still think, though, the issues that this Rangers team has had this season is, you know, there are players there who should be having a look at themselves. But what you tend to find in football, Cammy, is that when players, I always go back to something Sir Alex Ferguson said, which is don't give footballers excuses because they'll take them. And what he meant by that was the last thing they look at is what they're doing. It's always about, the manager said this, or a teammate did that, or it's the fans, or whatever. And he said a big part of football management is removing those excuses from them. And I think in the case of some of the Rangers squad this season, there's it's a lack of the requisite skill set to be a Rangers player. And I don't necessarily just mean that they're not good enough, although that's clearly the case on some of them. But if you look at some of the players, it is, you can't cope with this. You can't cope with this environment, and you can see it, they wilt in this environment. And the environment is never going to change. This is what it is if you play for Rangers. And so, there's only so much you can do. They shouldn't need to be told at this stage, Cammy, you're playing against St Mirren. St Mirren are going to play for second balls, so you've got to be committed to winning second balls. You shouldn't need to be told that. You should know that. You shouldn't need to be told that the first goal Rangers conceded last week, they were both terrible, but the first one in particular was just nobody switched on. That's a basic. That should happen at any level of football. If you play fives or amateurs, you'll get a bollocking off your teammate if your man just runs on and gets, he's standing in clear space to get a shot away. So, after a while, I think there does come a point where you just say, right, we need to get rid of them and bring in guys who are more able to do what we need to be done here. So, yeah, like I say, I think that it's never a case of it's entirely down to the manager. And it's never a case of success is entirely down to the manager. It's a team game, and you need to have buy-in from that. I think in the case of the players, there's been certain matches that they've done it. They've done the things they've been asked, and they've been rewarded for that. They just haven't been hungry enough to be rewarded game in, game out.
And to the manager's point, the bare minimum for me when you go into these types of games, all fun games, Europe, etc., is that you'll expect energy. You mentioned about the kind of lethargy we've had before. I agree. I think one word that I've found myself using when talking about some of the bread and butter domestic games is it's been so pedestrian in terms of how the games have been controlled or lack thereof in terms of when Rangers should be dictating the play and they're not. Opponents will go up against them. It's their cup finals when they're playing against the Old Firm, especially for us, given our kind of weakened condition at the moment. And I think you mentioned before a great phrase in terms of a number of these variants can run in tandem, and they'll start to mount up. And another thing as well, which I would like us to be able to ensure that we don't see on Sunday, is players who are risk averse. It's so easy just to pass it to the guy who's 10 yards away for you, pass the ball back the way, and stay hemmed in because you're not looking to be brave. We've mentioned it so many times. Being brave in games like these is not about steaming into tackles and, committing stupid fouls that you don't need to do. It's about making decisions that can get you up the park, that can see you being able to cut through the midfields and defences. And it just feels that at times, outside of the Old Firm games domestically, we've just been so afraid to do that at times. I don't understand as to why some of these players can't just feel that they can take a risk. It's not going to necessarily lead to, the catastrophic nature of conceding a goal, but you're inviting that pressure anyway, because you just do not want to think as your first thought, let's get the ball up the park. It's just, it's frustrating at times because the players have shown in patches where they can do it. That's where I think that it becomes really disappointing when, as you mentioned earlier on, these players will revert to type to just play safe rather than take that risk.
Yeah, this is a bigger conversation, and it's something that I see in football and other leagues as well. And I know that, for instance, Gary Neville has been raving about this, which is we're in an era in football where the most passes made at the end of a season these days it's central defenders, because we're watching, that has been coached into players now for a number of years, that you keep the ball, so if you're in any danger of losing the ball, you knock it back the way and you start again. And it's led to at times this sort of staid and dull football. I think this season, for example, Cammy, everyone is raving, that I know that watches football, everyone's raving about PSG and Barcelona and the way that they play. And it's because it's a almost a throwback to, because they, as you mentioned, they look to get the ball forward as quickly as possible. They trust their wingers to actually dribble past a man and to accept that they'll sometimes lose the ball and they'll need to win it back. Whereas safety first football has gripped, I think, a lot. And this is a much wider debate about the type of style that has become really popular. And because of this particular style, where it is about, don't take chances, make sure that you keep a hold of the ball. And especially in an environment like Rangers, where if you do give the ball away, you'll hear the groans from the supporters. You still have to do it. You still have to try it. You've got to be brave enough to do it. What I've always argued is that, by all means, right, I understand you don't want to get the groans if you give the ball away. I think you get as many groans these days if you have a pass on and instead you turn around and play the square ball back to defenders. Football fans aren't stupid. Rangers fans in particular know what they're watching. We can see when you're doing that. We don't think, oh, he had a really good game because he didn't make any mistakes. We think he wasn't, he was just playing safe all the time. We can see that. But that is something that I think hopefully will evolve. Football evolves. And I think hopefully when teams come through, and this is what always happens, of course, coaching ideas spread, people get influenced by what's happening at the top level of the game. And I'm hoping that people look at Barcelona and PSG saying, okay, we don't have players as good as they do, but we can still try and ape the things that they do. We can still try and take things from it and learn from it. The way that I think modern football has gone, where it is constantly just about, turn around, give the ball back, stay in your position. Everybody needs to make sure that when we don't have the ball, and maybe it's gone too far. Maybe it's just gone a wee bit too stale and a wee bit too safety first. And I think that we've all watched games where it's like, there are passes forward here and you're electing not to take them. And the Rangers team do default to that consistently, where it is tough to break down a 10-man defence. It absolutely is. There is no space. I get that, but you need to find it. That's your job. Right, and passing the ball endlessly side to side when the opposition are not going to hurt you. This was something I thought was a failing of Philippe Clement. He would come out after matches at times and say, well, we had 65, 70% possession. That's a meaningless stat in a domestic game for Rangers because the teams will give us that possession willingly. They're quite happy for us to have the ball and, to be knocking it about our back four at the either at the top of our half or at the start of theirs, because they're not in any pressure there. That's what I think is an understanding of the culture of Scottish football that you need to get in your head. That means nothing here. It's what you do with the ball when you have it, because the other teams will let you dominate possession. You haven't won a battle to do that. They're quite happy to have 30% possession, work off set pieces and second balls and whatnot. So I think that's a wider thing within football, but it's definitely been a real problem with Rangers. And that leads into, I don't know anybody who says this Rangers team is good to watch, because it isn't. And that's fundamentally true. Some nights we can be very successful, as we've seen, playing, a certain way, but we know that it's not going to last. We know that it's going to be this one-off, this gargantuan effort in a European game or an Old Firm game. And then when we will be playing a match against a side that we should be beating, let's be honest, we will revert to this sort of safe, dull, boring football. So I think that's one of the key things for a new manager coming in, is to have a clear identity of what he wants to do. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean someone comes in who is an absolute zealot to his style and he will play it regardless if he's got the players to do it or whatever. No, I don't mean that. But just someone who says, look, this is the type of football I want us to play. This is what I'm going to coach them to play. These are the type of players I'm going to sign because they'll help us to play that. I think we need all of that, a much more a much more connected idea, because what Rangers have done in recent years is they've signed players because we think they're good players, right? So you get enough good players together, they'll all be able to play, right? And it doesn't work. That theory falls down, because what you do is you end up with a lot of players who don't complement each other, who don't fit together in a system. They're all, they all have individual qualities, but those qualities don't mesh. And I think you've seen that, and this Rangers team can look very disjointed at times, can look very fragmented. And the reason for that is that's the squad that's there. It's all these jagged pieces that don't fit together. So what you now need moving forward is, as I say, someone, hopefully it'll be Farewell, maybe Steinson, but whoever says, this is how we play. these are the type of players we sign to play that way, and we hire a coach who can coach players who can play that way. And that's one overriding idea of how to go about it, and then you work towards that aim.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that word disjointed, because one of the things that I wanted to kind of get your take on as well is, at the moment just now, we are massively struggling defensively and conceding, stupid goals, as you saw in Paisley last weekend. It's a real bugbear of mine when it just feels as if right now this defence looks like as if it's met 20 minutes before the game kicked off. It is going to have to be something that is going to have to be addressed. Sunday is a test for that. Again, we've mentioned already that there will be changes. We understand that. I suppose what I get frustrated at, David, is just the manner of the goals in which we are losing. Now, Celtic will have far higher quality, which we know about. That defence, for me, I'm not convinced by what Barry Ferguson is trying to do. Yes, we've got only a few more games till the end of the season, so it's not going to be here for very much longer. But the nature of how that defence is going about its business, I don't know if we pointed towards a 3-5-2. If it's working, it's not working. I don't think that central grouping really fully understands who should be where and who should be tracking, and then you conflate that with guys who are not following runners, whether that's through central or in the flanks. I'd ideally like us to be able to address some of those issues, because it's something that needs to be focused on, is ideally being able to try and get a clean sheet, which would be lovely, because it's been a good wee while domestically since we've had one.
Rangers' defensive record this calendar year is an absolute disgrace, and the players should be embarrassed by it. And, Barry Ferguson asked, I don't know if they hurt enough when they look at stuff like this, because, we're hurting as fans and he's hurting as a coach, and I think he's right. But yeah, there is no getting away from it, that you cannot say that since Ferguson's come in that the defensive organisation has improved, because it hasn't, and that's on him and his coaching staff. But the players again need to take a long hard look at themselves as well in that. They just always, to me, look lackadaisical. They always, to me, look confused. They always, to me, look like they are waiting on someone else doing it. I think we've had examples of that in the last few weeks, where people have been pointing to the goal scorer rather than going and dealing with the goal scorer. And it's like, well, you saw him. Why, rather than give away that responsibility, or try and give away that responsibility, try and pass that responsibility, why didn't you just deal with it and then ask questions later? And that's when you begin to question things like commitment, because, are you putting your body on the line as a defender to try and stop that goal? Clearly you didn't. No, you just sort of stood there and watched. So the defensive side of the game for Rangers the last few weeks has been a joke. And it's not just the defence. Defending starts from the front. We all know that. But some of the mistakes that are being made back there. And to me, as I say, if I'm a coach coming into Rangers, I'm just looking at that going, I can't work with that guy if that's, the kind of performance he's capable of putting in and then not doing anything to improve it. Then I'd be getting rid. So I think it's a combination of Rangers not having good enough defenders, but also they shouldn't be as bad as this. They shouldn't be conceding 2 goals a game. They're not that bad, and yet that's what they're doing. So I go back to that point where Barry Ferguson said these guys are playing for the future. Well, what we're getting at them suggests that they don't see a future here, and to be honest, what they're providing suggests there shouldn't be one.
Yeah, and just before we wrap up, I'm just also keen to get your thoughts. We mentioned earlier on that the prospective new owners, nothing is completed yet, but I think we're pretty much nearly there. We're getting a tour around Ibrox during the week. Obviously, they were overtaken in the Leeds game as well, and had the tour around the stadium. But we're already entering, I think, Davey, the managerial gossip in terms of who could be potentially coming in. It's went from Marco Rose to more recently talk about Sean Dyche because of obviously the Thelwell connections, etc. It's going to ramp up until someone is signed. I wasn't sure if any of the names mentioned, got your blood flowing. I can't really commit to anyone at the moment because I think the candidates that I've seen mentioned, you don't know if they're genuine or not. You don't know what is going to be true. Some of it will definitely be clickbait in order to try and generate some interest in names that are probably never ever going to come near us. For you, I'm assuming that what you're hoping for from the manager and being able to come in is a philosophy of being able to play that attacking football with energy. As you rightly say, we know that there's different parts of the game which are evolving, whether or not it's going to be involved within possession that doesn't really apply to us domestically. But we're going to get this until name is or pen is put to paper to get someone confirmed. In the best will in the world, my hope is that as soon as the takeover is near completion and we can announce that very shortly thereafter, we're announcing a new manager.
Yeah, the new manager has to be ready to go day one of pre-season. I think that's a guarantee that they know that he's got to be able to come in and start. And this is why I didn't want a permanent manager appointed after Barry Ferguson. After Philippe Clement came in or left. Sorry, because what happens is that we've seen it so often, not just here. It's happened at Man United this season. With Amram, the stink of this season clings, and what happens is you go into the next season with doubts about the manager, fair or unfair, you do, and then if they don't start well, you're into that negative cycle again, and it usually ends up with the manager being sacked eventually anyway. So I think it's better to give a manager a clean slate and to have that optimism around the club while it happens. Yeah, look, none of the names that have been mentioned, and we can only speculate on those. None of them come with a clean record. None of them come without a disappointment in their career. We've seen that, and all of them are different types of managers. And the link that's being drawn, as you mentioned there, we live in a click harvesting era. You can see how that they've drawn it. So Gerrard, he's an ex-manager, so right, he gets linked to the job. Rose, there's the Red Bull connection, so he gets linked to the job. Sean Dyche, he worked with Kevin Thelwell. So you can see it, despite the fact they're all completely different types of managers. What I thought was interesting was Steinson saying when the chat was going on about Daniel Farke at Leeds, whether or not he'll stay or go, and Leeds telling the press down south, well, yeah, Steinson's been meeting managers, but it's for Rangers, it's not for Leeds. That might not be true, incidentally. Football clubs don't always tell the truth, as frustrating as it is, but I think that probably is true. So what I would say is it could well be one of the guys that's been mentioned, or it could well be someone we haven't heard, because Thelwell came out the blue. They had done their business very quietly there, and it came out in the morning and it was announced in the evening. So, the idea that they are out there and it's only the people we're hearing about, I think might be a bit fallacious. Equally, though, we are getting close, as you say, to when a decision is going to have to be taken and the person coming in. Philosophy is a word that I kind of recoil a little bit from, because you've seen coaches who take that too far and they stick to it regardless of whether or not that's a sensible thing. I was watching the Champions League semis this week, Cammy, and one of the managers who impresses the shit out of me is Simone Inzaghi. Now, he's not going to come to Rangers before anyone gets excited. I'm not suggesting him. I'm talking about the style, right? I'd love him to, but he isn't going to do it, right?
It would be an interesting move, I think,
it
for him.
Would be, his next move, if one comes up, is likely to be to the EPL. But he is a manager who's been at clubs, two clubs, Lazio and now Inter, and he's been successful at both. But it hasn't been the exact same way. At Lazio, he didn't have good attacking players, so what he did was he made them hard to beat. Then when he went to Inter, he does have good attacking players, so he plays in a more attacking sense. There's still a philosophy there, they're still underpinning it, but he's not a slave to it. He's not someone who is dictated to. He doesn't come in and say, in the way that, say, Amram at Man United has done, saying, I play this way and I don't give a toss what the playing squad is like or who's in it. They're going to play this way. And you see the results of that. To me, that doesn't work. That's like trying to build a table when you don't have the right tools and you don't have the right wood to do it. It's all right saying it, but it's not going to work. You need to have the ingredients or the parts, or you're not going to be able to build what you want to build. So I want a manager with a commitment to attacking football. I want a manager who understands that he's got a much bigger budget than 10 of the 11 sides he'll face, so there is zero reason not to be dominating them. That should be the aim. It's not just to sneak by games. It's to go out there, win, and entertain while you're doing it. You don't want somebody who prizes entertaining above or playing a certain way above winning. So it's a balance. It's like everything, there is no black and white. Everything's a shade of grey. And in this case, I want a manager who says, look, I want to come out and I want to attack. I don't want a possession manager, to be honest, because we've had that with Clement and Gio, and I don't think it works for us because of the thing I mentioned earlier about the fact that you get the possession domestically anyway. So possession for the sake of dominating possession, if that's something high up on a manager's list, which I love us to be in complete control of the ball. No, I don't want that. What are you going to do with the ball once you get it? Defensively, we've got to be a lot better, and whoever the incoming coach is, I'm sure will be going, well, at least, as soon as I start coaching, we're going to have a better defence, because there's surely only one way to go with that, and that's up. But I think that, it's a complex role and that it has challenges that aren't there at other clubs. The expectation, the league, the physicality of the league. But equally, you have advantages, and I think that's something that can be forgotten a little bit about. Rangers have a significantly bigger budget than all other clubs bar one, and we need to take advantage of that. So I don't want someone who is obsessed with the formation above all else. I want someone who looks at it and says, okay, this is my goal. This is how we're going to achieve it. This is what we're going to do it. But is flexible enough to say, okay, certain matches I might need certain different things, particularly at the start. I want a winning, successful match. Like everyone, there's no great secret here. I want somebody who comes in who's a winner, but who gets us playing in a way that I enjoy going to see Rangers. It's been a slog going to see Rangers for a few years now. It shouldn't be that. It should be something where you're desperate to see them, to see what they can do. And, of all the names mentioned, like I said, I don't think there's anyone who's leaping out and saying, him. And I think that what we tend to do as fans is we look at the managerial candidates where they're mentioned, they're almost avatars for what we want, and we project what we want onto them. So, for instance, someone like Muscat's got a reputation for playing attacking football. If you want attacking football, you go, well, Muscat with it. I've spoken to people that were, it has to be Muscat, and I've asked them about, games they've watched of his sides, and they haven't watched much or any. And that's what I mean. It's about projecting. It used to happen a lot with McInnes when people would say, we need someone like Walter, hire McInnes. And I'm like, well, he isn't that. You want him to be that, but he's not. He's not Walter, right? But you're looking and you're projecting the qualities that you're looking for in a manager onto this particular manager. Whoever comes in will get backed once he's in. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He'll be backed financially better than any Rangers manager's been for a few years, and the fans will get right behind him. But our demands don't drop, our expectations don't drop, and a manager coming in has to be aware of that, has to be aware of what we want. But Rangers fans do not accept and shouldn't accept playing a team with a budget that's 10 times lower than ours and going there and it being a 50-50 scrappy match every week. It shouldn't be like that. You should be able to do better than that. And I hope that whoever coming in realises that.
Yeah, very fair. All good points. You'll be pleased to know I've just put 20 quid on Inzaghi to be next Rangers manager. I'm going to pay the mortgage off.
I think you should just give me that 20 quid because it'll go quicker. But yeah, that's what I mean. And as I say, you look at certain managers who are absolutely obsessed with what they do and their style and their brand, for want of a better word. I like a manager who goes, okay, what have I got here? Right, okay, yeah, right, great. This is the best way that this team can be successful. If I play this system and coach them this way, I like that. I just think that's practical. And it doesn't mean, though, that he completely abandons, the principles that he has. It just means that he says, okay, what's the best way of working the squad that I currently have? Because I can't think of any situation, Cammy, where a manager's come into a club, been able to buy the 28 players he wanted, for...
And it's worked straight away.
I don't think it works like that. So I think that if you have a manager who comes in and says, look, look, and by the way, it doesn't mean that we play this way right now, so we're going to play this way forever either. He can say, well, look, long term, I want to get in a player who can do X and Y, and when he or they arrive, we will begin to do this as well. That's perfectly sensible, you know. So I just think that the last few years at Rangers, it's all been a bit thrown together. You know, we've had this squad that's been randomly assembled with no real clear thought as to how it all meshes together. We've had coaches that have been brought in to try and swing for the fences, basically, to go, right, if we get in the right coach, he'll almost like a magician be able to turn it into something, even though there's off-field chaos and even though the squad doesn't fit together. I don't think it works like that. And I think the good thing about this year being almost this summer, rather, being a kind of reset, is that we're able to go, no, hold on a minute, right? This needs to be, let's get this all connected from the boardroom through to the training squad, to the manager, to the players. We need everybody to have the same goals, the same idea of what we're trying to do, and more importantly, the same understanding of how we are going to do it. And when you get that buy-in, then I think you've got a much bigger chance of success, because what we've tried has not worked. The jury is in on that. It has not worked. So we need to try something different. And hopefully, as I say, the new start has given us the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be a very exciting summer, David. Absolutely no doubt around that. You'll be back with a flagship on Monday to discuss the Old Firm game. Hopefully, a resounding victory for Rangers. If you want to hear more from us, folks, head on over to our Patreon site, which is patreon.com/Heart and Hand. We will give you all of the news, whether it's regular updates or breaking news as well. You can get all of your Rangers content across there. Thank you to Mike Lee and Paul Myers, our executive producers. Thank you all for listening. But most importantly, and this is the reason why he's the top dog, we've been able to have a brilliant conversation, Davey, about the current state of Rangers and to talk about how excited I think that we can feel about some upcoming changes. I really appreciate you coming on this week.
Always a pleasure, mate.
Folks, have a brilliant Old Firm game on Sunday. Hopefully we get a result. We know that there's not too much on the table, but it's always fantastic to beat Celtic at any point. David will be back with you on Monday, and I'll be back with you next week. Have a brilliant weekend. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.